Hi, people. There's a number of things I want to cover here, and they're all connected to the issue of national security. So, my subscribers won't be surprised. This is something I feel very strongly about, which is involving both the Chinese and Russian governments. More in this one about the Chinese government, but there's something I do want to discuss about the Russian side of things as well. So, bear with me. There's a number of things I want to address here, but they're all kind of interrelated. So, here it goes. I read about a young man, and I must admit I wasn't familiar with him, so I've done a bit of research on this. A young man by the name of Drew Pavlou. He's an Australian citizen in his early 20s of Greek Cypriot descent, and he's a long-standing human rights activist. And he's been active in Australian politics at a grassroots level, trying to lobby for a more assertive stance on China. He's had a few run-ins. This is what I gathered from my research with Chinese nationalists on campus. But by all accounts, he is a tireless campaigner on this stuff, and he's outspoken. From what I gather, and I must put the caveat, I don't know the guy well, but from what I gather, he's pretty brave because he is willing to stand up to one of the world's most powerful regimes. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone that does that must have some courage. Anyway, it caught my attention on Twitter because he was arrested in London a few days ago for protesting peacefully outside the Chinese embassy. Or rather, he wasn't arrested for protesting, but arrested ostensibly for an email that purported to be a bomb threat against the Chinese embassy. Now, obviously, the Metropolitan Police have to take that seriously. London is a city that has experienced terrorism, and embassies are an actual target for terrorists. The Chinese government is hated by many people, so it makes sense that they would be a potential target. So I don't blame the Metropolitan Police for acting on it. But what's disturbing about this case is that this young man was held, as he says, this is his version of events. He was held for 24 hours, almost 24 hours. It was only after the first 3 hours that he was even interviewed and charged with the offence of sending this threatening message. He denies this, um, and he says that he had no consular or legal assistance in this time. Now, the Metropolitan Police apparently have issued a statement. He's been freed now, but the Metropolitan Police have issued a statement denying this, saying that they did try to get in touch with his legal representatives or his solicitors, and they weren't picking up. Now he says in an interview on an Australian network, this is just a straight up lie because they didn't explain anything that was going on. They didn't tell him he was being charged at least until 3 hours in, and he didn't get any assistance. I wouldn't put it above the Met to lie. I think that some people are a little bit dew-eyed about this. They ignore the fact that there is some very unethical things go on in the Metropolitan Police. It's one of the world's biggest police forces. They are the police basically for Greater London. So here's my issue. It's not that they acted against this. They have to take it seriously. I understand that. But they should have given him access to lawyers. They should have given him access to consular assistance. And they should have done their homework in the sense that he's a prominent human rights activist. The Chinese regime is absolutely capable of defaming people. One practical thing would have been to check the IP address of the so-called email. I think it is very, very much within their means to basically just fake an email to kind of silence their critics. So, if they rig up an email, it could be a Chinese activist who's pro-Beijing, sends his threatening message to the embassy, pretending to be in Drew Pavlou's name. It wouldn't be that hard to do. You just create up a fake email, use the guy's name, and they say, "Oh, look, he sent us a bomb threat, so he's dangerous. please arrest him. I'm not criticizing the Met for doing it. They have to take it seriously. But, you just look at the way this guy's been treated. I mean, he has peacefully protested. He hasn't incited any violence. Um, from what I gather, he has never incited violence. He has been vocal about China's treatment of particularly the Uyghurs, um, their infiltration of universities. He stood outside a Confucius Institute in his university in Australia. I can't remember which university it was. In a hazmat suit. Now, perhaps that was the wrong choice. I don't know, but I just think this is very, very concerning because if the Chinese regime can make false allegations against human rights activists and dissidents, whether they be Chinese or other nationalities, this is a grave threat to free speech. And I think we need to take it very seriously. Now, the Met, it's not good enough saying that they gave him consular assistance. He's saying that's a lie. But if it, I want to know this IP address. I think this is very important. If this turned out to be a fake email, then it needs to be ascertained where it came from. And if there's any strong indication that's from a Chinese source, then frankly, the Chinese ambassador needs to be summoned to explain what's happened, why this false allegation has been made. And if it's found that the Chinese embassy is making false allegations, um, I think we should seriously consider expelling them. When is the lesson going to be learned? We cannot trust Beijing. We just can't. Um, so there's a few things related to this. The Tory leadership election campaign, Sunak versus Truss. Now, my big concern about Rishi Sunak is he's too cautious on China. Interestingly, today, Benedict Rogers, who's someone I respect, again, a human rights activist, he's a Tory member, so he has a say in this race. I know that national security matters to him. I know that um, our relations to China and being assertive about China matter to him. So I value what he says because he's the chairman of Hong Kong Watch, or rather, one of the co-founders. I value what Benedict Rogers says. Um, and he posted this tweet where Rishi Sunak was accusing Liz Truss of being soft on China, which seems to quite an extraordinary claim. And as Ben said, in fact, I'll get up the exact tweet if I can. Just bear with me a second. Yeah, I mean, I really think Sunak needs to do a lot more to show that he will be assertive on China. This is the tweet from Ben Rogers. A bit peculiar, Rishi Sunak. Have you not reread your Mansion House speech from last year? Question mark. Liz Truss has led the way in challenging Operation Kowtow, not rolling out the red carpet. You're confusing her with others. Yeah, I have to say, of the two candidates, Liz Truss has a better track record. Foreign Secretary, she has not failed to speak out on both Moscow and Beijing. I know that when Ben Rogers has been in trouble, she has spoken out. She's spoken out against Beijing's interference in our democracy. Sunak, maybe I need to look more into it, but I just think he's too cautious. It's all very well for him to be pointing fingers. I would say, Mr. Sunak, what can you show in your record that shows you're standing up to Beijing? What will you do, for example, to really, really rein in on Beijing's malevolent influence in our education? Will you, for example, withdraw funding from universities that are overly reliant on Beijing? Will you take action, significant action against Chinese spies? Um, like the woman who was uncovered earlier this year, passing herself off as a lawyer, working with MPs. I really think this is one of the gravest threats we face. Um, yes, right now, Russia, with its antics in Ukraine, is definitely a concern, and we should never underestimate Russia. But I think that one problem with the Ukraine war is it might have distracted us a bit from what China's capable of. The truth is, the bear and the tiger are, I would say, both threats to this country. We can't just focus on the bear and turn a blind eye to the tiger, and we can't just focus on the tiger and turn a blind eye to the bear. I think because of what's happened in Ukraine, understandably, people are focusing on Putin's belligerent antics. But I really think there is too many people in positions of power in the West, in politics, in business, senior levels in education, that are just too damn willing to kowtow to Beijing because they're scared. And they have this attitude that, well, China's just too powerful. We better not speak out against them. And, staying pally is good for economics. We can't sell out on our values. We can't. And it isn't just about values, it's actually a practical thing. I mean, the way the CCP tried to cover up COVID, I think, was a glaring example of this. The way they tore up the Sino-British Joint Declaration on Hong Kong, the way they rile up Chinese nationals to bully Hong Kong peers and those critical of Beijing. I heard today that this is just an example of, I don't want to call it a culture clash, but this sort of soft nationalism, let's call it that. Chinese demonstrators were protesting against a French fashion company. I don't think it was Christian Dior, it was one of the other ones, for supposedly appropriating some Chinese style. Well, my question would be, are you not appropriating Western clothes? Um, and also the number of fake Western copies that you find in China from little mini, in fact, I think it's in Hangzhou and Shanghai, you get these little mini Western villages. Now, some of this may come from colonial history because Shanghai did have European concessions, but a lot of it's just tacky copies. Most Westerners, I don't think, really care about that. And some people might think this is just part of the culture wars, but I think it's actually a deeper problem. I think it's an example of Chinese sensitivity. I'm sick of Chinese sensitivity, and I'm sick of these little nationalists having tantrums every now and again and thinking they can bully or pressure Western companies to change. In Germany, I think it was either 2021 or 2020, there was a children's book that withdrew sales and made a groveling apology um, because they were trying to pitch a book that explained the pandemic to children. And it simply said the pandemic began in China, which is the consensus. That's what is widely believed is to be the case. So apparently, some Chinese parents in Germany furiously demanded this be withdrawn because it incited racism, which is complete nonsense. Well, the publisher withdrew, made a groveling apology. The German government apologized. I am really tired of the West caving in to Chinese sensitivities. And to what extent is the Chinese government inciting these sensitivities? I don't think it's always direct. I think there is something also in among Chinese nationals where they kind of feel it's this loss of face or something. I think there is a cultural issue going on. And I'm in a position to say that because I've been to the country twice. I know all about this loss of face mentality. And I know history. I know history. Chinese people still remember the century of humiliation, and they still cling to that on some level. That's the truth. There is this overt sensitivity, and it's pathetic because it's kind of this double game of we're victims of Western racism, yet we're big, powerful China. You can't stop us. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't play the victim on one hand and then, bully and throw your weight around on the other. Respect is a two-way street. So I hope this fashion company does not cave in. I hope they say that we are pluralistic, we're inspired by this design, and we're not appropriating. And also call out the protesters. But I don't believe the company should change from the power of the mob in any context. Um, I think, of course, they should be respectful. But if we're getting to the point where, I mean, I can make a whole video about cultural appropriation. I think it's just so often based on overt sensitivity and hypocrisy. My message to those protesters: if you think that this Western company is appropriating Chinese culture, don't be a hypocrite. You just wear traditional Chinese clothes. Don't wear Western style clothes. Because the clothes that you're wearing, do you think they existed in China 100 years ago? No, that's Western influence. So don't be a hypocrite. If you're so keen on this issue of appropriating different cultures, then be consistent and don't appropriate Western culture. Um, the other issue which I want to address, so yeah, I'll be watching Sunak and Truss very closely. Right now, I have to say I trust Truss a lot more, simply because I think her track record speaks for itself. I feel as Foreign Secretary, she has been outspoken. And I'm not saying it's enough. She's only been Foreign Secretary a year. She'll have to be consistent with this. She'll have to take action against, for example, infiltration of our universities. I'd like to see her government, for example, call for the closing of Confucius Institutes. I read a report the other day, UK Universities International, I think that's her title, which is kind of the body responsible for British partnership with international universities. Their new president, their new chair, she was talking about how there's going to be grave consequences for international students or international partnerships, looking at the situation with Russia and Ukraine. Well, my attitude and my response to that is, yeah, I'd like to think there is a bit of pushback. I'm not saying that stop Chinese students coming to British universities. I'm saying we need to be really, really assertive with this. And her attitude, I forget her name off the top of my head, but I was just reading this and I was thinking, she's calling for appeasement. She's saying that we need to basically kowtow. I am sick of, it's not just politicians, it's business people, it's those in education and sports and entertainment, Disney. The West needs to stop pandering to Chinese sensitivities. We need to stop being so damn scared of them. That's what it comes down to. I think too many people in positions of power in the West are scared of China. And you know, I get it. China's powerful, but no power is absolute. And I honestly believe that collectively, if we stand up to them, they will back down. I don't believe that they're so confident and so ruthless that they're not capable of saying, well, actually, we need to be practical here. We can't take on the whole world, or at least the whole developed democratic world, for want of a better term. But yeah, the kowtowing disgusts me. I think it's cowardly, I think it's pathetic, and I think it puts our national security at risk. And I felt for a long time now that we've really, really underestimated it. I mean, MI5 has been warning about this for years. The Cameron Osborne administration was completely, their record in this was appalling. Um, Johnson was a bit better, but he flip flopped on Huawei. May was strong on Russia, not so much on China. So the new prime minister, the new government, and this also applies to Keir Starmer, the coming years are going to be critical. We really, really, really have to take a much bolder stance of China. We need to rein back on their influence. We need to stop being overly reliant on them when it comes to trade. There's a lot more we could do. Anyway, the other thing I'm going to mention is about Russia. And it's good news, just to close on good news. And I'm just going to read this from the Times. The reports by Jonathan Emmett, legal letter. It's from July the 20th. Curb on legal action that threaten free speech. Courts will be given greater powers to throw out legal actions that are deemed to threaten free speech under plans unveiled by ministers today in efforts to curb lawsuits such as those brought by Russian oligarchs. The crackdown on so-called lawfare, also known as strategic lawsuits against public participation or SLAPs, will also impose a cost cap on litigation to prevent defendants from being forced to back down over fears of going bust. Proposals from the Ministry of Justice were given fresh impetus earlier this year as Russia invaded Ukraine, and it emerged that several prominent London law firms had represented oligarchs in an attempt to silence critics. Under the government's proposed reforms, Courts will apply a three-part test to determine whether a case should be dismissed immediately. A judge will take a view on whether a claim is brought against activity in the public interest, for example, investigating financial misconduct by a company or an individual. The court will then examine if there is evidence of abusive process, such as a claimant sending a barrage of aggressive letters on a trivial matter, and the judge will then review whether the case has a realistic prospect of success. Um, Ministry of Justice officials said the tactic is increasingly being used to intimidate journalists, authors, and campaigners into limiting or abandoning critical stories or books. Two writers, Catherine Belton, who wrote Putin's People, and Tom Burgess, the author of Kleptopia How Dirty Money is Conquering the World, recently faced litigation from oligarchs, including Roman Abramovich, the former Chelsea FC owner. In March, Belton told MPs that the system was stacked in favour of deep-pocketed litigants from the outset. Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, said the government won't let those bankrolling Putin exploit the UK's legal jurisdiction to muzzle their critics. That's another good move by Raab. I honestly think he is one of our better Justice Secretaries in recent years. He's been assertive on these sort of things. But the courts have to follow this up. It would be a damn disgrace if Putin's cronies are allowed to exploit our legal system to silence dissent in this country. Same applies to the Chinese. I mean, don't put it above the Chinese doing the same thing. Chinese high level journalists, politicians, and so on. What all of this shows is that we need to get a lot tougher with both, I was going to say both Moscow and Beijing. The Johnson administration, to its credit, has been tough with Russia. China, not so much. We cannot be complacent. We just can't. And it infuriates me that there are still loads who are pandering. Um, the truth of the matter is, Moscow and Beijing pose national security threats to this country, and we need to take them seriously. I'm not talking about a total, we just throw out everything Russian and Chinese, like some sort of cultural purification. No, I'm saying we just need to get a lot more assertive. And we need to absolutely show no tolerance to any attempts to bully us. And I'm sick of appeasers. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. A lot of issues there. But I'm pleased Drew Pavlou's been released now, but this is a worrying precedent if the Chinese embassy can just make false claims against people. I think the Met need to look at that IP address, and if it's found to be from a Chinese source, then Liz Truss, as Foreign Secretary, and her department need to be summoning the Chinese ambassador to explain what the hell is going on.